Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. On the other side of the computer screen, you will see the extremely well-known and overworked, and when does this guy sleep, Kevin Gray of Coherent Audio, Coherent Records now.
Well, it's that plus Coherent recording. So there's three things, but Coherent Audio is my mastering business. Coherent Record speaks for itself. Coherent Recording is the studio operation in conjunction with a label.
And do you now have two different remastering locations, Hackensack West and something else?
No, I have one mastering room, which is also the control room for Hackensack West, which is only for the recording of my projects. If
Okay.
that makes sense.
And where in California are you, if you can say?
San Fernando Valley.
Beautiful, beautiful. I wanted Kevin to get all these other people's interviews out of the way, and I finally asked him to do an interview, and I really appreciate it. Both you and Joe Harley are so gracious with your time and your knowledge. I mean, it's really something. I mean, I see Joe, he likes all the different jazz-related Instagram things, and you guys are really on the ground with the folks. Why have you? I mean, you're just a guy, I know, but it's kind of unusual in the industry. Why have you all decided to be so transparent in general?
Well, I guess because we love what we do, the fact that there's so much interest in the Blue Notes kind of warms our hearts collectively. We really we respond to the people who really like what we do, and we're very pleased.
This thing just keeps going and going. It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. It truly is.
It's really something. I put
Could
part
have
of it.
never predicted it.
Yeah, and just the fanaticism people have about the tone poets and the classics. Well, I took questions from my group, and if I had a few questions of my own to start with, what is essential to do your job as a remastering engineer?
In terms of equipment, or
No, just the basic criteria in regards to your history and experience in the business. What do you need to know and understand to do what you do so well?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, obviously I've had, a lot of years of experience. So knowing the equipment is a big one. Knowing how to deal with master tapes is another one. There's a lot of factors to that. I don't know if I'm answering
You
the
don't have to go too
question.
deep into it.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to go too far down the rabbit hole.
Oh, okay. All right. Um, yeah, it comes from a love of music and an opportunity that's come into my life to be able to do all of these classic recordings. I'm doing this Concord sort of the OJC2 series now too. So a lot of those are Rudy Van Gelder tapes. So, it's fairly easy to deal with those because we've been doing them for so long. I kind of know what to expect. We know the different eras, the monos and the stereos and all of that kind of stuff. So
Are all of the Rudy Van Gelder tapes in similar condition?
pretty much, yeah, I would say so.
And what Joe says is that they are most of them are in extremely good condition.
Yes, it's true. It's true. They've been well handled and cared for, which I can't say about all the tapes from that era.
Why do you think that is? But they still have that quality control. What accounts for that, you think?
Um, it's run by music lovers. Don was just loves jazz as a walking encyclopedia of jazz, and he's a great guy to deal with. And of course, he's instrumental in both the classics and tone poets. Joe kind of oversees tone poets, and Jem Kurzman oversees the classics series. So
Yeah, I mean, but I guess going back through, I think before there was Michael Kuskuna, Bruce Lundvall, and everybody. This label has been blessed with such dedicated people to support it. And now you guys doing all this amazing work. It's uncanny, isn't it?
it is, and thank you very much. I appreciate the compliment.
Oh, sure, of course. So when you and Joe are working, when you first put up a tape, what are you listening for, and what are you aiming to change for the
Well,
remastering process?
we're not aiming to change anything unless we hear something that we think needs enhancement. No preconceived notions when we put up a tape. But very, very few of them require much. It's not a huge process to master most of the Blue Note tapes, especially the ones prior to 1968. After that, Rudy was going multi-track, and there were some other things involved. But on all the early stuff, we know pretty much what to expect.
Yeah. How many would you say you've done at this point, including all the stuff for Music Matters?
Joe kind of figured that out for me at one point. The number we came up with was around 350 titles. Yeah, right.
That's remarkable.
It boggles my mind, truly.
What do you do? I mean, these are old tapes. Isn't there hiss on the tapes and pops and noise in places? Don't they have to be dealt with somehow?
Not usually pops and that kind of noise. There's a bit of hiss, but it's all part of the original recording, and we don't try to remove that because you'd lose some music in doing that unless you want to do digital restoration. And we want to keep them all analog because that's what our clientele want.
Why do we not hear that hiss?
It's there. It's just
it is.
Yeah, well, you kind of remember one thing, that Rudy is known for hitting the tape kind of hard, which does, give you a little bit of distortion on the horns and the cymbals and a few other things from time to time. But, he was trying to keep above the noise level.
He did, unlike, in my opinion, Roy Dunan and all those contemporary records sound so incredibly consistent and the same. Rudy was, I think, it seems like he was constantly experimenting, constantly experimenting. And even an artist he knew really well, like Elvin Jones. Mm-hmm. You hear, why do we sometimes hear Elvin's cymbals go crazy? You would think
again, it's because he was hitting. It's because he was hitting the tape as hard as he was. Yeah, it's there on some of the Blakey stuff too.
He really liked to experiment, didn't he?
Well, yeah. In the interviews that I've heard with him, he said that he did most of experimentation on the Prestige stuff. And then once he gleaned from the Prestige stuff, like new tools, like new microphones, new equipment, he would try it out there first and then use it on the Blue Note stuff.
Oh, that's fascinating. And what do you think accounts for, the Blue Note thing has a definite sound, Prestige has a different sound, Impulse, again, is as definite and defined as Blue Note. Is it a matter of different producers? Why do those labels sound different than he did?
Yes, I would say so. It's the producers. It's well, of course, the Hackensack versus the Inglewood Cliff sound. That changed, but yeah, it's the producers. It's the fact that they did so much rehearsal on the Blue Notes and they didn't tend to on the Prestige stuff. So I think the Prestige stuff sounds a little rawer, if that's a word, more raw.
Right. And the Impulse stuff, a lot of the Impulse things, they also sound pretty hot at times.
That's true. Well, Rudy was recording them too. I mean, one of my all-time favorite jazz records is Blues in the Abstract Truth, and what an amazing title that is.
That's a beautiful record. When I first started really getting into jazz in the 70s, that was a record to have.
Absolutely.
And people don't seem, that's still a wonderful record, but it's not such a must-have record anymore for some.
Man, I can't explain that. The other one that I'd put up there with that would be Something Else on Blue Note.
Phenomenal record.
Exactly. Yeah. Two of my all-time favorites. Kind of hard to beat Kind of Blue, but I put them right up there with it.
I thought in the Jazz Bums interview, you said that you did one remastering of was it Kind of Blue?
Yes.
And the critics didn't like it. What did they not like? Or
no. They didn't like the one. They didn't like the one that preceded mine. They did one in 2009 for the 50th, and the audiophile press came down pretty hard on it. So they sent it to me and asked me to redo it, and I did in 2011. And that's out there, but it's not stickered any differently. So I got one, but they're a little hard to find.
How strange. I see all these young guys, they have so much knowledge. They come into the store and it's incredible the knowledge these guys have built up going down these rabbit holes of all these things. And I'm just like, shouldn't you be out dating or something? It's kind of remarkable.
It is. I mean, the median jazz age is getting younger and younger and younger. Seriously. I think it was Blue Note that did kind of a study of the demographics, and they found that the average listener on the tone poets and the classics is like 37. That shocked me.
That's amazing.
I know. I agree. I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, that's a wow, that's a study piece. Um, I guess I mean, it's such amazing music. It's timeless music.
Truly,
It's easy
truly.
to get into, and
Right.
and there's the 75th anniversary, then the tone poet, then the classic vinyl. That's all, isn't there?
Well,
For
there was Music Matters before that,
right,
before the
music out
75th.
before that. But I wanted to ask you a question. I believe Alex Halberstadt from Stereophile interviewed you about a piece. Did he? I think he did for Stereophile.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yes, yes. And Alex and I, we're contrarians. We like the not on everything. It's almost a case by case issue, but in some instances, I like the sound of early pressings or OGs better than what you and Joe are doing. They,
I understand.
yeah, they just sound more immediate. I guess I want to hear something more historical. What do you? Why is that? What accounts for that?
Well, Rudy was a
We
bit
like tubes
heavy-handed
and
in his mastering.
we like tubes and horns for one thing.
I'm sorry.
We like tubes and horn speakers.
Whoa. Okay. All right. Yeah. No. Rudy did a lot of stuff to the tapes in mastering, and we're giving you something that's a little closer to the master tape. Rudy kind of had his own vision for how they should sound. Vision, it's not an auditory word, but for how they should sound. But more power to him. I mean, if you want that original sound, you're not going to get it, on the Tone Poets or the classics or the Music Matters.
It's I think he spoke to you. I think maybe it was Tom Fine who said sometimes the older records sound better on systems of an older design, which would sort
Mm-hmm.
of make sense, I guess. What do you think as a mastering?
Right. Right. I mean, because they were kind of geared towards systems of that era.
Right. Hmm. I thought it was interesting in the acoustics interview you were talking about that you thought sound went strange for a while in hi-fi and people were doing SET and horns, which you wanted to get away from. But then you heard an avant-garde system and with some sort of German tube amps, and then it made sense to you, which was encouraging from a tube head like myself.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm into tubes too, obviously with my new, recordings. But yeah, I heard the avant-garde system actually was Italian. They were Italian amplifiers, single-ended triode amps.
Right.
But yeah, the guy's system sounds fantastic.
That was quite a
I've heard a
story.
lot of the stuff that I've mastered on it, and it resonates with me in a really nice way.
That was a great story. Took you out for a nice meal. Come back, tell me what you think of my system. I'm sure a lot of
Right.
people extend that invitation. You probably have to be careful who you say yes to, I would think.
No, actually, not that many people have, but he
Really?
did, and yeah, he was taking us to dinner at Vibrato, which is Herb Alpert's restaurant,
Oh, wow.
pretty high end, and so it was hard to say no.
Right. Wow, wow. What is in your playback system, either at home or are they similar at home, and what's in the mastering system? I
They're
guess
almost identical except for the power amplifiers.
oh,
The speakers are custom. I'm using Dyne Audio mid ranges and tweeters, soft domes, and JBL 12-inch mid bass drivers and 18-inch subwoofers. And it's a tri-amplified system. It's
wow.
four-way, but with a passive crossover between the mid range and tweeter. And I'm using a Class A B version of the Class A amplifiers that I cut with in my studio system, which I don't have access to more of. So I'm using different amplifiers in my system at home. But
Class A as in CLASSE?
well, Class A as in the way the transistors are operated,
Right,
where there's no switching going on. They're driven full on all the time.
right, right. Yeah, I get that. There's also that amp company called.
Yes, yeah.
And what's your turntable in both systems for playback?
Well, I'm actually using the lathe for the playback in the studio. At home, I have a Technics SP10 Mark III
And what's
with an
your
SME.
cartridge?
It's a V15 Type 5
And your phono
at the
state?
studio. Custom. It's actually it's solid state at the studio. It's vacuum tube at home.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I built a custom tube phono preamp just for my own edification, And that kind of wound up being the prototype for the preamplifiers in my tube cutting system. So, it's just using RIAA the other way around, so to speak.
If you built a tubed phono stage, I would buy it, and you could sell shit tons of those things, man.
Well, thank
Wow.
you. Yeah, it's I'm not really interested in getting into that,
Wow.
but, but
Yeah,
thank you.
that's the world I live in. But you, Kevin, I mean, I know you have to have another Kevin Gray to do that, because you need another
Yes,
Kevin Gray
yes,
now.
I would. My wife would have something to say about that.
How do you do all of this? You look pretty well rested to me.
It's tough. It's tough. It's a lot of work, and especially since starting the studio and the label, I've made that much more work for myself. But so far, so good.
I don't know. Do you keep like 9 to 5?
I It's a little more than that. I cut 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, because if I cut on Friday, lacquers would be sitting over the weekend, even if shipped. So that gives me one day off on Friday, and that usually winds up being about my only day off, because on Saturdays and Sundays, I do stuff for other clients that's from digital sources, and I have to load those into my computer and get them ready to cut and that sort of thing. So I stay pretty darn busy.
Good. Jacob Weinstein, one of the newer members of my group, asked, when you put up tapes from Rudy's, do you ever hear talk or chatter from the studio? And if so, what did they talk about?
Yes, I wouldn't say it's often, maybe on 1 out of 20 tapes. Of course, that's the other side of the leader tape, so you'd have to look for it, which, Joe and I sometimes do, just to see what's going on. Sometimes it's things like, I think Rudy put out a CD that had a bunch of that on there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. It's in the RVG series, but it's stuff like telling Lee Morgan, "Can you stand back from the microphone slightly?" Or, things like that. There's a famous one where Miles Davis says, "Is that what you wanted, Alfred?" That kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. Have you been to Inglewood Cliffs? I imagine you have.
Well, it's a funny thing. We just went to New York for vacation and tried to get in there, but they actually had live sessions booked, so we
Oh,
could not. I have not been there, but that's going to happen down the road for
oh,
sure.
I'm sure it will. I did a piece. We went there in 2015. I did a piece for Stereophile when they did one of these early Coltrane records, and it's an amazing place. There really is a vibe there.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure.
it's really something. And I know I think they're still trying to landmark it, because I know
Right.
an Asian entity wanted to put it down and put up hotels or something. So that
Yeah,
would be insane. When
crazy.
do you hear any difference? Is your process any different with Hackensack versus Inglewood Cliffs tapes?
I wouldn't say the process is different, but there is a different sound, and sometimes we have to adjust for that, but it varies from project to project.
What's the difference in the sound?
The amount of ambience in the room, mostly, the room was bigger, obviously, at Inglewood Cliffs. And although he was adding, plate reverb to most of the stuff that he did after 56 or whenever it was, there is still a difference there. And sometimes the top end is, needs to be adjusted a little bit on the stuff from Inglewood Cliffs. It was I think a little more consistent from Hackensack, but
Wow. Was he using a spring reverb at Hackensack or note reverb?
a plate reverb, both
Plate,
places.
plate.
Yeah, like the EMT plate, he had one of the very first ones. Maybe in 50, might have been as early as 55.
Wow. And
He was using a spring reverb prior to that, and you can hear it.
yeah, I've heard that in some places. The Hackensacks, it may just be in my mind, they seem to sound more intimate at times, which would
Well,
make
it's a
sense.
smaller room, and
Right.
that was kind of part of the thing we were going for with building our room. Yes, you definitely get an intimate sound, and I love that. It doesn't really allow more than 6 or 7 people in the room conveniently, but he also did what, Gil Evans plus 10 in that room, which I
Really?
can't even fathom. I can't imagine how he did it. He
Wow.
must have he must have put them on risers or something.
Yeah, I saw that photo of you and Rich Capeless. I guess you guys are having dinner, and it's astounding what he did at the RBG Legacy site. I mean, it's incredible what he did there. I mean, judging that the couch is next to the piano because of this Sonny Rollins shot sitting on the piano.
Right. Yeah. I cannot praise his work enough on that. It's just it's mind-boggling to me.
It is, and his whole approach to collecting records is that way too. Everything
exactly. I saw your interview with him. It was perfect.
He's just. I wish I was like that. I'm just not like that.
I don't know who else he has done interviews with, but of all the stuff that I've seen, yours was really, really good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, he was. I don't agree with everything he agrees with, and I have crotchety ideas, but he was
of course
to speak with. And I was lucky. I got to him right before I think he and his wife moved upstate or something.
Yeah, Akko. Yeah. We had a wonderful time. We went to the Village Vanguard and, or no, we went to Smoke Jazz. I'm sorry. We went to Smoke Jazz.
Who'd you see?
Yeah, he was there. Oh, we saw, that was Lewis Hayes that night.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, Ron, my wife's correcting me. It was Ron Carter.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, we saw them back to back. Lewis, they're both 86 years old, 86 years young, I should say.
Wow. It's remarkable.
It is.
Onward with my jazz vinyl lovers questions. Christian Robek Knutson asked, how close is DSD to the original master tape in his opinion, and what are the differences?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'm not a fan of DSD and never have been. First off, but they went from DSD 64, as it's called, to DSD 128, and that was an improvement, but I was still hearing an artifact with it that I've always heard. And then they went to 256, which coincidentally is what MoFi is using now. And I was very, very impressed. I love the sound of DSD 256. I was doing some recordings for Ray Kimber's label. I'm forgetting the name of the label right at the moment, but I'll think of it. But anyway,
from Kimber Cable.
I'm sorry?
From Kimber Cable?
Yeah, wow. He has his own record label, and he's doing mostly classical, and I've done a couple of titles for him, and they were recorded native 256. The original recordings were done DSD 256, and they sounded phenomenal. And that's when I had a chance, when I had the system in, after I did the first title or two with him, he just started sending it out because I'd learned how to operate it. And so I started transferring some stuff into it and listening back, and was always impressed with what I heard coming back. It sounded very, 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 very close to what went in, which I can't say with a lot of digital systems.
That's for sure. I mean, I have for Stereophile, I have to listen to some things digitally, and it just doesn't enrich my soul. I don't care what the streaming device is. And I mean, it's easier, but
yeah, I'm with you.
It just
with you 100%.
Yeah, it just doesn't. And plus, I use it so infrequently. When I fire it all up with Rune and all that, it's like, learning the alphabet over again. This shit drives me nuts.
I hear you.
Bob Bowser asked, what is the one thing about the remastering process that most laymen would find surprising?
Boy, that's a tough one. How amazing it is to hear an original master tape. I mean, that's almost bragging because I know everybody doesn't get that opportunity, but it is a pretty amazing thing. Yeah, I've talked about when I first heard Dark Side of the Moon, it made the back of my hair on the back of my neck stand up.
Dark Side of the Moon?
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Wow. Where'd you hear that?
That was the 30th anniversary one in 2003, I guess it was. Yeah.
Where was that at?
That was when I was working up at Acoustic, and I actually collaborated with Doug Sachs on it. What happened is when he moved up to Ojai, he took his mastering systems for cutting lacquers out. He, after a few years, put them back in again because he realized the error of his ways. But at the time that he did that with me, he didn't have a working disc cutting system. So,
wow, that must have been insane.
It was very, very fun. And, I'd always admired Doug, and I'd known him for years, but that was the only time I ever really got to work with him. And it was a blast. That's
great. William Reed from our group, due to a few Blue Note tapes that have been lost, such as the master tape of Duke Pearson's Sweet Honeybee, would Kevin consider transferring from a clean original vinyl pressing to tape or DSD to make a new vinyl pressing for a reissue?
That would never be my choice. That would have to come from the label. I wouldn't be against it. I mean, there's a couple of titles that we've done just recently that were recorded straight to disc originally, prior to 1948 when tape happened. And then Rudy transferred them, I think, around 1955. One was a Monk album. It was recorded in 47, and it was all to disc. And then we just did another one recently. Of course, I'm not supposed to be giving these away. I don't remember what it was recently, but same thing. It was transferred, and they sound so clean. Without hearing the master tape, so to speak, that Rudy created, you wouldn't know that they were dub downs. They just sound great. And
So he made tapes from 78s or something.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
78, I don't yeah, they were probably 78s. Yeah. But
Wow.
but not from pressings. They would have been from either from the acetates or the metal parts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were virtually pristine. And
Oh,
doing that Monk was just thrilling to me because I'm a huge Monk fan.
oh,
And
really?
it was in essence, because you're hearing the earliest recordings of those songs. It's like hearing Monk for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it was a blast.
Yeah, I love Monk's earliest prestige stuff. That's my favorite. What
Yeah.
what do you collect? What artists do you collect?
Oh boy. I love Lee Morgan. I wasn't really familiar with him until I started doing the Tone Poets. I hate to admit it, but I just wasn't. Of all of the Blue Note artists, I really probably knew less about him than any of their other prominent artists. I knew Blakey, and I knew, you know, uh, Herbie Hancock and um, Horace Silver, and most of the guys, and Freddie Hubbard.
Right.
But I wasn't really familiar with Lee, and I'm a huge fan now.
Wow. And I saw that you mentioned the Gerald Wilson record you liked a lot. You recently
Oh
did.
yeah, Moment of Truth.
Hmm.
Yeah, that
Interesting.
was an amazing recording. That was originally Pacific Jazz.
Right, right. Um, Ross Lippman has many questions. I will try to bring it down to one. Does Kevin listen to a mint first pressing? I know Joe listens to early pressings before you guys work, and the non-EQ'd master tape before beginning a remastering project. And what are his thoughts on the topic of creating a better version of the original pressing or the best production of what is on the master tape? I think I know the answer to that question.
Well, yeah, we've kind of already hit on it, but Joe brings that original pressing that he has in, and we often do listen to it.
Oh,
Um, the flat tape is what we start out listening to. I mean, there's only one master tape, and that's what we're working from. We don't, you know, you don't dive in and just start EQing something. You got to spend some time listening to it first, and then we'll kind of look at each other, and we're like an old married couple. We kind of always kind of go for the same thing based on what we're hearing.
oh,
So yeah, that's kind of the way it works. And I think, as we said earlier, I think it answers his last question, we're not really going for matching the original. We're going for trying to give you the best presentation of what the original master tape sounds like.
I guess my problem with some of these is compared to the older pressings is they it makes it sound like they're new recordings. Like Hank Mobley is in a hotel waiting to go into Rudy's tomorrow, which I guess is a great thing. But
Yeah. Well, Rudy compressed them. He panned them in. People have said, well, you guys are doing something to widen the sound. It's like, no, we're just not panning them in, and he did all of that to make them play on older systems, including, usually filtering the low bass. That was another common thing that he did when he cut. So, yeah.
he boosted the mids, which gave the horns more dynamic
Exactly,
punch.
exactly. But that doesn't tend to sound as good on a modern system to me, with the
Right.
mid-range boosted.
Yeah. So it's my feeling that Rudy was making records for the systems of his day, and you
Exactly.
guys are doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
systems.
think you just
Yeah,
you just hit it in a nutshell.
because systems are so much wider. I mean, I've heard, well, not to go down that thing. Well, that's interesting. Um, and I think you answered this already. How much EQ is really necessary in the old master tapes?
In all honesty, we rarely add more than 2 or 3 dB at any frequency, and generally not more than 1 or 2 frequencies, without getting real specific. And it changes from project to project. But as a general rule, you know,
You guys,
we're not getting heavy-handed with them.
right? You guys get there in the morning. You bring in your croissants, I don't know what you guys eat in the morning, your coffee, black or with cream or sugar. I don't know.
I have black coffee in the morning.
Me too. So a certain amount of time is spent listening to this new project, this original recording and the tape. And
Right.
then do you do one record in a day, like the whole
Two.
process?
Two.
Two.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. On both classics and tone poets, I do 2 a day. And Joe books 2 days in, so we actually do 4 titles on like usually a Wednesday and Thursday.
Does Joe have his own special chair?
Yeah, he gets the producer's chair.
Right. Um, Bob Matson asks, remastering, what is the most common, uncommon adjustment being made to the original recordings when mastering a record? And is there something, in your opinion, that should never be adjusted when remastering an album? That second question is interesting.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get into my philosophy. I mean, I don't, is he asking about Blue Notes or I mean, that's a very generalized question. I mean,
I
I
think
guess
that's general.
my
That
first answer would be I would do to it whatever I think it needs. I mean, in some cases I have gotten very heavy-handed with stuff, I mean, there's projects that I've done where I've added 9 dB of bass or taken off 9 dB of treble. I mean, it's not common, but
Blue Note
it
thing,
happens. It happens.
a Blue Note project.
No, no. Um, generally we're kind of giving away a secret here, but it's not uncommon to add a couple of dB of low bass on the Blue Note stuff.
They all have much more bass than my earlier OG pressings.
Exactly, and that's intentional.
Yeah, because that sounds more modern.
Ron Rambach used to say, "Giving it a little more foundation." That was his term, and I think that's a good way of putting it.
Is there any difference in a sonically between a Music Matters and a Tone Poet to you?
Well, there's been a lot of changes in my system since we were doing Tone Poets. Well, the 45s. We did do several 33 Music Matters on the new system, but yeah. But let's see, did that answer the whole question?
That's enough for that one. I have
Okay.
a few more here. I don't want to keep you forever. We asked this earlier. How do you fully invest in a new mastering project when you have so many to do?
Well, geez, how do I answer that? I get paid to sit there and listen to music all day. I mean, how many people can say that, other than maybe radio disc jockeys? So, I love doing what I do. I love hearing things sound as good as I feel I can make them sound. And a lot of times the best thing to do is just leave it alone because it sounds great. And that's not uncommon either. So it just depends from project to project. But I don't try to do more than 2 projects a day. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, occasionally I'm doing stuff from pre-mastered digital sources, and I can, bang out 6 or even 8 sides in a day, but that's not where I have to do all of the mastering.
Wow. And what is the volume level generally like in your
85
playback
dB,
suite?
I don't go over that really.
Over what?
85 dB, that's kind of my normal,
Isn't that's a little loud, right?
C weighted. Not to me. I mean, I've kind of always listened at that level. I mean, I know an awful lot of mastering engineers who listen at 90 and 95 dB, and I'd be deaf if I did that,
Yeah.
So.
That way you save your ears day to day and don't get too much ear fatigue.
Right. And you got to remember, that doesn't mean I'm listening at that level for 8 hours a day. That means I'm listening at that level when I'm running it down,
And it's
so it's a couple hours a day.
right. And your speakers are largely, it sounds like Dynaudio components.
The mid-range and tweeters
those have to me all their speakers a very smooth characteristic sound.
Exactly. Yeah. It's actually a loudspeaker system that I've been building with minor changes since the 80s. It hasn't changed that much.
Wow. I know you said your amplification was Class A, but is it custom? You made it yourself, or is it a brand?
Well, the amplifiers that drive the cutting head, well, the whole chain from the cutting head, from the tape head to the cutting head, is pure Class A. All the line amplifiers, EQ amplifiers, everything is pure Class A, and the power amplifiers that drive the cutting head. And then we took those Class A amplifiers and we operate them Class AB to drive the monitor system, because there's 2 per channel, and the the current draw would be excessive. So yeah,
And what are your, if I may ask, your interconnects and speaker cables in your mastering suite?
it's all Audio Quest.
Oh, that's amazing. You know, for
Yeah.
years, and I know Stephen Mejia's at Audio Quest, we're buddies. I didn't like the Audio Quest sound, but they recently sent me a pair of these Zero Tech cables,
Uh-huh.
Pegasus, and it was like, it was incredible. These things
Hmm.
were like so saturated and supercharged. It was like putting you know, American muscle car in my system. It was really, really amazing. But that's really good to know.
Yeah, we're also using their power converters too, which I really highly recommend. The Niagara
Oh,
power
wow.
converters. Yeah.
Yeah, I know the guys, several people at Stereophile have that and they swear by
Yeah,
them.
Garth is a brilliant design engineer.
Yeah, I think apparently his new series is really, really something. They make so many things.
Right.
Um, your Coherent label, I actually have, I believe you cut a Victor Feldman label early on in your label.
I did in
I have it, man.
1977.
I found it somewhere. It sounds incredible.
Oh,
That's
thank you.
what a
Thank you.
what a great system. What sort of system was used for that?
Well, that was done at Whitney Recording Studios. There was nothing really custom on that record. Alan Sides engineered it, and he brought all of his own vacuum tube mics. We used a lot of AKG C12s and C12As on that recording. And then it went through their Neve console, which a lot of it was bypassed. So it just basically went from the mic pre to the fader.
Wow.
And then it was a stock Neumann SAL 74, SX 74 cutting system. And I just did the cutting. I just got the groove on the record.
Well, it sounds fan. I was so shocked. I found it somewhere at some store in the city. I was so shocked to get it. It sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
About when was that produced?
77.
Wow, that's what I thought. Yeah, it's like, yeah, when I'm a kid, it's amazing. And it
Well,
sounded
yeah, you know
great.
what was so fun about that record was that Victor had just come off of doing Steely Dan Asia. You know, he's all
Wow.
over that record on keyboards. And so that was a thrill. And I literally just cold called him and said, "Would you be interested in doing a direct to disc?" And he initially said no, because he thought I was asking him to be a session player.
Oh,
And then he said, "Well, who would the leader be?" And I said, "Oh, I meant you." And he
you.
goes, "Oh, really? Let me think about it for a couple of days and I'll call you back." And he called me back and said, "Yeah, let's do it."
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great record. Harvey Mason on drums,
Oh
right?
yeah, Chuck
Oh,
DeMonico on bass,
yeah.
Hubert Laws on flute. I mean, it's Hubert kind of stole the show. A lot of people think when they hear that on the radio, which they still play it out here, they think
Huh.
it's a Hubert Laws record.
I think it's a what?
Hubert Laws
Oh,
record.
that's funny. Well, yeah, he's really incredible. But that's
It
a
is.
great record.
Thank you.
And shows
Very
how
proud of
true
that.
your ears were so true even back then. I
Well,
mean,
thank you.
you were a whippersnapper. Um,
We also did a follow-up record called Secret of the Andes, which was on the Nautilus label, but I was involved in that, and Alan engineered again.
I
Same
sort of
studio and
remember that.
everything.
Wasn't that sort of a popular record?
It was for a while, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
It was on Nautilus. It wasn't on Cohearent.
Yeah, Nautilus was a cool label. Joe Harley said, this is Frank Black. Joe Harley said in an interview about a year or two ago that Blue Note has a large number of recordings that were never released, and that there was a probability that Tone Poet Series was going to release some of them. Can you ask Kevin Gray if that is true? No, Joe lied, and whether or not he's heard any of these recordings.
Yes, I have, and some of them are just amazing. It's like you shake your head and you go, "Why did they not put this out?" You know. So I can't speak of any titles, but yeah, there have been some great things, and they'll be coming out.
Well, that's great. Because I know if you look at various discographies, there's probably even Lee Morgan stuff in there. You'll see holes of
Yeah,
things they did.
right,
They have such a wealth. Uh,
right.
Channing Reynolds, he did a fantastic job on what I think is jazz release of the year, Children of the Forest, which I bought at the store and I was amazed. Wow, the Kevin Gray did this too. The amazing Milford Gray title. Are there any other free jazz titles he's worked on recently?
I do a lot of work for Aramite Records, a guy named Michael Ehlers, and he's done some very cool stuff. Just, if I could think of the artist's name, I'm terrible with names.
How do you spell Eremite?
Eremite.
Okay, and it's all
And
free jazz stuff.
Yeah, it's all free jazz. That's all he does. Avant-garde jazz. I don't know, different labels they put on it, but
And
yeah.
that stuff you're doing now?
Jeff Parker was one guitar. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yeah, Eremites put out some of his stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, Milford Graves was just a force of nature with
Yes,
Arthur Doyle.
yes, and I think he's put out that might have been on Eremite. There, or at least I think
Oh,
there is one on Eremite. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, Rob Johnson asked, Kevin has mentioned in a couple of his interviews that one reason his system is unique is because it is transformer-less. Can you
Correct.
ask him to elaborate on that?
Well, okay, in most recording systems and mastering systems, there are transformers like in the output of the tape machine, sometimes between the head and the input to the tape machine. And it's not uncommon to have, well, in the day, it wasn't uncommon to have transformers in every link in the chain, at the input and the output. And you go through enough transformers and it really starts degrading the sound, seriously. And we found that just getting all the transformers out of the system, which involves a lot of tricks in grounding and other problems to avoid having hums and buzzes and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's just to further the transparency of the system.
So it's OTL, as they say.
Well, that would just be in a power amplifier, but this is all the way through.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to have a lot of transformers in a mastering chain.
Sure. Wow. I mean, so does that mean you're using more tubes?
No, it's all solid state.
Okay.
My main mastering system. Yeah.
Oh. Um, Deck Hines asked, does the vinyl, and I've always wondered about this, does the vinyl formulation being used now in comparison to the 50s and 60s make a difference to the pressing quality? Is this part of the reason why old Plastic Light Blue Note sounds so good?
Yeah, I can't speak for the old vinyl. I mean, I got in the business in 72. And vinyl's changed since then considerably. And I can't speak to the chemical compound because I'm not a chemist, but I don't know how well known it is, but back in the 90s, the EPA forced everybody to get lead out of vinyl. Lead was used actually as a lubricant, to make the vinyl flow in the press. And there was a period of about 5 years there in the 90s and early 2000s where there was some not as great sounding records coming out because of that, because they had to find synthetics that would allow them to produce as good a record. And I think the vinyl they're producing now is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, it's the consistency of all the Tone Poet stuff or all the acoustic sound stuff. It's just it's insane. It's remarkable how
It is.
beautiful the work is, the pressings, the artwork. It's just I often say this is a golden era of golden age for reissues.
It's another, yeah, it's a second golden era. Yeah, it's true.
It's astounding, and it kind
I
of
agree.
spoils people who don't realize that this vinyl is as quiet as any CD. So if it's not perfect, like a lot of people complained about the Coltrane Dolphy at the Village Gate because it was kind of a weird balance and all that, even though it's an incredible recording,
Mhm.
people get upset right away. Oh, it doesn't sound what they're used to hearing. Finally, Moises Salas asked, what is the next Cohearent release? What are you working
Ah,
on for your own label?
okay, it's in the can. We recorded it back in June on the 20th and 21st, and it's Anthony Wilson on guitar. By the way, he's Gerald Wilson's son, in case you didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't
Um,
really know that. Oh,
oh
wow.
yeah, and
Oh,
it's Gerald Clayton on piano, John Clayton, Gerald's dad, on stand-up bass,
wow.
and Jeff Hamilton on drums. So we're excited. It's everybody who's heard Teases has been pretty impressed. So yeah, we think it's going to do really well.
Did you hire a publicist to work the it's Christopher Edkins? What's her name? I'm sorry.
Kirsten?
Yes, did you
No,
hire a publicist? You didn't, yeah.
I'll tell you, the only advertising we really had for Kirsten's record was this video that was produced by Ben Williams that you can find on YouTube. If you just Google Coherent Records, it'll come right up. And it's a 17-minute video describing the whole process of creating all of the tube equipment that was used for it and building out the studio and everything involved.
Well, that's
So
remarkable. Huh.
yeah.
Are there other artists you'd like to record? Anthony Wilson, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I can't really discuss anybody, but there's a lot of artists that we've even had some conversation with. So yeah.
That's great. That's great. And
And
is there
also people ask, are you going to do other stuff besides jazz? And down the road, I think we will. I could see myself doing, it'd be acoustic music mostly. I could see myself doing like a bluegrass record, or maybe it's not acoustic, but like a rockabilly record. Something
oh,
something in that genre.
that would
Just
be
something
great
different.
to hear you do that. Oh, is there a record you would like to remaster that you haven't had access to, regardless of label?
Well, I've often said I'd love to do the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, but I don't think it's going to happen. but
What do
who
you think
knows?
of the whole demixing process Giles Martin did on the last record?
In all honesty, I haven't been that impressed with that stuff. I mean,
What do
my
you not like about
go-to
it?
my go-to is the Parlophone originals. I bought the blue box set that came out in 82 or 3 or whenever that was. And that's kind of my go-to for what I think the Beatles should sound like.
But is that because that's what you are used to? That's what's in your heart and in your memory, or is there something you
No, not
specifically
really, because
don't like?
I mostly had the American pressings back in the
Oh,
day.
wow.
So yeah. And
Yeah,
they
but
weren't nearly as good. I'm sorry.
anything is preferable. Well, it's funny. I love the Revolver mix because you can hear everything. It doesn't sound like the back of a can. But earlier this week, I listened to the Abbey Road remix, and I realized I like the original British better. It had more bang. It had more
Yeah.
kick or more richness, but it wasn't as
Yeah.
spatial.
To me, it's kind of like rewriting history. I don't know. That's all I can say.
You
I mean,
sound like
the first thing I ever heard that Giles did that impressed the heck out of me was when he did the music for Love, the Cirque du Soleil show. Because it was nice to be able to hear, individual bass tracks and, this kind of stuff, and vocals, isolated vocals. But, as putting them out as records, nah, they didn't impress me.
Love scared me. It made me it sound like a horror, like a nightmare to me. The Beatles, disconnected Beatles vocals swooping in from weird places, and
Yeah, but it was fun once. I don't want to keep hearing it.
sonically it was great. But
Yeah.
well, that's interesting. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for doing this. And Kevin has dealt with all my screwed up brain matter and
Oh, no.
actually
No,
made this
no
happen
problem.
today. And
It's all good, Ken.
thanks, Kevin. But it was a great pleasure to speak with you, and I appreciate you letting me run all these kind of clerical questions about it. So
Happy to do it. My pleasure.
great, man. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.